What is going on, you guys, and welcome back to another live broadcast here on the Sergeant Tank Pets YouTube channel. If you want an opportunity to win one of these shirts, you're going to have to hang around until the end of this live stream because the details and what have you will be announced a little bit later on in the live stream. So Vi said, what do you look for in fish food? Ingredients, protein, content, etc. Okay, so if you look back in my repertoire videos, I did talk about this in great detail. I want to say it's the top 10 things used in our fish rooms. I can't remember exactly what it's titled. But I can definitely talk about that because that is something that I really focus on, especially with certain cichlids. So for me, I will get to the foods I use specifically. However, before I even mention any foods, because I don't want anybody getting in their mind that it has to be that food. Because if I tell you guys specifically what manufacturer of food that I use, without kind of going into some of those more elaborate details on why I use those foods leading up to it, I just think from a mental point of view, sometimes you can get, distracted that way. So for me, I look at balance of diet. So whether if it's a herbivore, if it's a carnivore, whatever type of species of fish, I always will incorporate a balance of protein and carbohydrates. I find that is much more efficient, much more effective. Even if that is quote unquote supposed to be strictly a, for more vegetation in their diet, as long as I incorporate some type of proteins in their diet, I find that it's much more effective over the longevity and sustainability of what you're keeping to ensure that they thrive without maintaining a balance of carbohydrates and proteins. And what that specific balance is, it really comes down to the size of the fish, what the ecosystem is. There's a lot of variables that go in there. Really comes down to experience is the biggest thing to me, is identifying the psychology of your fish, knowing what the fish needs by observing the behavior of the fish. For example, Jeffro with Jeffro's Fish Keeping just came here, and I think he was quite impressed due to the fact that I have these South and Central American cichlids in my 90-gallon setups that are very engaged. They come up to the tank. They're not skittish. That is because I interact with them. I get them when they're small. I raise them up together. I spend time with them. And most of us know this that have been in the hobby for any period of time, that fish are very intelligent when it comes to that. Usually, even if you go up and you start reaching for the food, you'll see 10, 15 feet away one of your other systems with fish in it. If you're engaged enough and you're around your fish enough, they will all start coming at the same time, usually towards the front of the glass. I find with most, no matter what fish I'm in, they know it's feeding time. They know I'm in there to feed them. Certain balances of calcification. So calcium is a very important aspect of it too. Whether if you're keeping shrimp, crayfish, plecos, snails. So calcium is very important as well. We are fortunate enough here based on our municipal water source where we actually have already calcium in our water content, but I do buffer that using crushed coral. And you can use other calcium supplements. People have used Tums, other things that contain crushed eggshell. So there's different things that you can do, but to balance it out, I find that crushed coral is plenty sufficient. I used to breed thousands of mystery snails of Palmacia bridgesii, and without adding any type of eggshell or anything like that, they did very well. They would actually graze on the crushed coral itself, and by incorporating some of these foods that I will talk about into the diet, it works very well. So the next thing is talking specifically about the foods, which I've shared this before. And I want to make this very clear. I'm not being paid for by, sponsored by, endorsed by, or any means based on these manufacturers. And I want to also make it clear, if it's not broke, why fix it? It is something I could sit here and talk about. Why change it? If everything has been going for you well, no different than your own diet as a human, stick with it. As long as you provide the diet confusion I've talked about, skip feeding, really, which incorporates the diet confusion, It's no different if you're somebody who lifts weights. You have to look at it that way. Fish are the exact same way. They need a balance in their diet, and they need to be confused. So if you go and hit the gym and you're working on the same body part every single day, whether if it's your upper or lower extremities, no matter what it is, if it's biceps, triceps, if it's your legs, calves, if you're constantly doing the same repetitive workout over and over and over again, you're not going to see any growth. Where that comes in is as far as the confusion when it comes to incorporating different aspects of lifting. Used to be volunteer being a personal trainer years ago, back in my teens. Used to hit the gym, used to be very in tune with myself, when it comes to diet, when it comes to lifting, that type of stuff. So a lot of that I incorporated when I started getting more back into the hobby years ago, about 14 years ago. I started incorporating some of those same things with fish keeping, and I found over the years has worked successfully for me. And what we currently use right now is 1/3 of each one of these foods. So I use omega-1 supercolor. I use tetracolor granules. And then we also use the Hikari Gold sinking pellet. Every one of those are sinking. And again, I've talked about this in great detail in previous live streams. What I have found is by having floating pellets, and I'll explain this a little bit more here in my thought process, but I had noticed more issues, ingestion of the gases by causing, or the air by causing gases, and not be able to expel those gases by creating bloat issues or swim bladder disorders by specifically certain fish going up and grasping at the surface as they're ingesting not only the food but also air behind that, and then it would get trapped. I stopped using the floating, and over the last 5-6 years I've only strictly stuck with sinking pellets in it. I've had no issues with that whatsoever. Reiterate, if you use floating, I don't want to alarm you. If it works for you, great. Don't change it. I'm just telling you what has and has not worked for me. So a lot of times people will incorporate, depending on if you have a top dwelling, a mid, or a bottom dwelling fish, is different food levels by how they're distributed. So some will stay on the top, some will float towards the bottom, some are slow sinking. And it'll give an opportunity, if you have a community set up where you have different type of fish at different levels in the aquarium, basically broken up into 3 parts, to be able to appropriately get the amount of nutrients that they need, so it's not being overwhelmed by a certain group of fish that's getting to it faster. So you also need to think about that if you're doing a community setup. Besides just the diet, you want to ensure, depending on the foods that you're providing, that it's appropriate for that community. The fish may get along just fine, but you may see issues with sunken in belly over here, and it doesn't mean essentially an internal issue as far as parasites, that type of stuff. It could be simply an issue where they're not getting to the food fast enough. And we also use canned French-style green beans. That is something that our Plecos have used through the years. You can feed it to your fish. So a lot of different things like it. Turtles like it. Snails love them. Crayfish love them. Shrimp will eat on them. I mean, there's a number of different things that will eat on them. And a tip when it comes to the green beans, and I shared this a couple of episodes ago, is if you are in a really, really warm climate, especially here in Michigan, it's really, really warm with all of the equipment running, dehumidifier, that type of thing. If your water level is a little bit too high, specifically during this time of the year, temperature-wise, is go ahead and put those green beans either like in a wine cooler, in the fridge, and leave them in there overnight or even for a few hours where they're not at room temperature. One of the main issues I find with other folks when they have issues is when it starts to really cause some negative side effects if you leave the green beans in there for any prolonged period of time where they're not at the bottom and where they're kind of being actively moved about. So I guess if they're more or less stagnant, if they just start flowing up to the top, make sure you get them out of there. As you'll start noticing some major effects, negative side effects on that aquarium. You'll start getting this really funky film towards the top of the surface. Now, if it's just a situation where it starts to get kind of cloudy, that will subside, that will go away. You'll know the difference between a really oily film at the surface versus just kind of a typical cloudy water when you're feeding, green beans. So I appreciate you guys have been hanging around. Again, beginning of the live stream, I mentioned that you could have an opportunity, as long as you are a U.S. resident, to win one of our Sergeant Tank white logo on black t-shirt, just like you see here. It's going to be a size large. I'm not going to be opening up. I mean, what you get is what you get. I will probably throw in a decal as well on the business card. So what you're going to do with a unlisted link down in below, all the information will be in the description. With that being said, you guys, make it a great rest of your night. As always, stay encouraged. Keep on keeping on. Happy fishing. And we'll talk to you guys right back here on the next one.